Nicolina, and thank you to everyone attending, and thank you to the presenters who are going to present tonight. I'll let them introduce themselves as they come up. We have Scott Monaco from Soil and Water Conservation District, and we have Nicolina and Jessica from Cooperative Extension. So thank you to them for bringing their expertise and experience. Saratoga Plan puts on these series of workshops really about farmland access and services that can help farmers, would-be farmers, beginning farmers, aspiring farmers, and existing farmers. And to that end, this work is funded by the Hudson Valley FarmLink Network. You see down below, it's also funded by the New York State Department of Ag and Markets. And we are thankful for their support and happy to be able to bring these types of programs to you. Anyone who doesn't know much about Saratoga Plan, we're the local land trust covering Saratoga County. We preserve farmland, we preserve other types of land like woods and habitat, and work on trails and things like that. So you can see some tidbits there. I'm not going to read it to you. We're also working to help connect farmland owners with farm seekers. We're looking to help farmland owners interested in conserving their land. And that's a short version. I'm going to stop there. If anyone has questions about plan or is interested in learning more about any of those topics, feel free to reach out to me. You see my name and contact information there. And Laura Kipper, who works with us as well. She's not here tonight, but she would be available to answer questions and help you out as well. So without further ado, shall I hand it over to Scott?
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Scott, I am gonna share your PowerPoint in a second here. Let me get that up and ready. Okay.
Unmute.
Oh, sorry. All right, go ahead, Scott, and whenever you need to, just let me know and I will move the PowerPoint for you.
Okay, I'm Scott Monica, Saratoga County Soil and Water Conservation District. We do a lot of things for farms. I know we have a no-till drill. We do tile, help with laying out and doing tile drainage. We do have some grant. Once in a while, we get some grant opportunities for farms and stuff. I'm mostly here just to talk about the soil group worksheets, which is what you need to get ag assessment to, it helps you with your assessment on your property so your taxes are lower. It affects property tax, your town and county property tax as well as school taxes. Some towns have extended it into fire and ambulance, but not all. So the first slide here is just this is the soil group worksheet. So when you request one, this is what you'll get along with a map of your property. It's just basic name and address information and stuff, town. And then I usually figure out the soils of what you tell me is ag, non-ag, and farm woodland. Okay, next. I think you can skip the next slide. You just go through it because the next slide, I usually don't give this. It's just an explanation. Not really that important. So you can do the next slide now.
I also believe everyone who got the Zoom link also got a copy, kind of an example form that we have up here on the slide. So you can look in your attachments on the email. So you could look at these at a later date as well.
Yep. So ag land. So this is the their definition of ag. I'm not sure, there might be others included in this, but I mean, you can see, so the 10 soil groups, I don't know, pretty self-explanatory. I think the next slide, is forest land, forest woodland. So the biggest thing here to remember is if it's just woodland, you can only have up to 50 acres per parcel. So if you have multiple parcels, it can be more than 50 acres, but this is just forest land. Like, obviously you can see, you get a firewood or whatever. If you have trails in the woods and you have like a horse operation, or if you have trails, forest land can be ag land. Like I said, if you're pasturing or trails, or if it's a sugar bush. If it's just farm woodland, you can only use $2,000 of either firewood sales or lumber sales towards the $10,000 that you need to qualify for ag assessment. So next slide. So non-ag, I mean, mostly around here, non-ag is going to be the landowner's residence. Some places it can be if you have, you know, if you're a greenhouse where you actually sell, or, you know, like if you're a horse boarding operation and you have an office in the barn, technically the office isn't supposed to get it. But typically what I do is non-ag, I just do an acre. Most of the assessors in the county agree with that, because most people around an acre is what they have for lawns or, you know, swimming pools, non-ag related business, you know, buildings and whatnot. So, you know, that's, for the most part, it's just a landowner's house. And, you know, if you have a garage or whatever, if you have housing for workers, that is included in the ag land. So just another thing to remember. Next slide. So here's your silvo pasture. This kind of explains what I was saying with the if you're in woods with pastures or whatnot in the forested area. I don't know if there's a lot of people that do that. I'm sure there's some, but next slide. So here's you got to have at least 7 acres in production. So whether you're producing yourself or you're renting, you have to have at least 7 acres. So with an acre of non-ag, if you have your house on the land, you need at least 8 acres. Obviously farmed for 2 years and the 10,000 average sales requirement, but that's gross, that's not net. So if you're not netting 10,000, that's fine. You just have to gross up to it. Support land is included in the ag. So like any farm roads, hedgerows, things like that, they would be in ag, the way I do it. If you're renting land, a rental agreement is not required, but some assessors do want it. So that's really what's tricky with the ag assessment is there's laws, but it's kind of like each assessor can interpret it how they would like. So next slide. So there's your gross sales. They can ask for proof. Some do, some don't. Like I said, it's really weird how some assessors, they stick right to it. This is what everything I want. Others are kind of a little more lenient. I know if you're renting, some of the farms will rent land, and a lot of dairy farms, like they'll just show bill of sales or receipts for like milk checks or something like that. Because some of them within a month they have the 10,000 gross. But next slide. So the other thing is with rented land, again, the farm's going to need to rent at least 7 acres. So I mean, it's pretty straightforward with that, and then that farm is going to need to have 10,000 gross. I know some people will do the work and like they want to do the hay and whatnot, and the farm buys the hay. So that way you're not renting the land. You're actually, you would have to show the gross. So it's, next slide. Well, there's the woodland, like I said, up to 50 acres. If it's maple, it would be ag. And it doesn't, you know, like if you've got just your taps are scattered all across it, so maybe it's not all being used, but it would all be considered ag, because you know, as well as if you're cutting firewood off it to make your crop for maple or others, you know, then it's basically support land, so it is ag land. Next slide. So there's, you know, that's just more on the maple. You know, like in there, the assessors has difficulty distinguishing it. Most of the assessors in this county, if you, whatever I put down on the map is what you're telling me. Typically, they don't question it. You know, I think most of them don't have time, but you do have to be careful because some assessors will drive around, and they do have the right to drive around. So like if you say an area is pastured and they drive by that, if it's a field or whatever, and they don't see any fence or any animals, they might question as to whether or not that's maple. So next.
So I actually have a question, Scott. When you were talking about maple, so if you're tapping maple trees, and like whether you have 40 trees on a 5-acre cluster or you have 40 trees spread all throughout like 50 acres, it doesn't matter. Like if you have them spread out throughout a larger piece of land, all of that land is considered ag, even though if there's only like so many trees.
Yeah, I mean, if they're scattered all amongst it, yes, you would just tell me that's a sugar bush, and I would say okay, and I'd put it as ag.
Okay.
You know, I'm not. I think people get confused, and I know this year I had a lot of people confused, and they thought that I was making the decisions, and I'm not. You tell me what it is, and I just do the math. If you don't get it, that's an assessor. I don't have any control over that. I'm basically just telling the assessor how many acres of each soil there is, and then the state tax department, real property for the state, sets the price for each acre and each soil group. So each soil is grouped into different groups, and there were, you know, there's 10 of them. If you go back and look at that first sheet, there's 10 groups. Obviously, one is the highest assessed value, and then it just goes down from there. So, but yeah, if you have, you know, 50 taps on 50 acres, you know, that's, I would advise of not doing that, because that's crazy. But if you tell me that 50 acres is all the sugar bush, it'll just be ag. So
We also had another question come in the chat, and it is, what is the AML stand for?
I'm not entirely sure what that is.
Drawing a blank, Scott. It's the Agriculture and Markets Law. So these are all statutorily defined by New York State in the Agriculture and Markets Law, the different categories of farm operation and sort of what qualifies under them for this purpose.
Yeah, I think I know when they first came out with the ag assessment law, it didn't include maple, it didn't include vineyards, and it was really just geared towards like beef and cattle operations, or beef and dairy. And then, you know, as people complain, now it basically includes everything. I mean, even Christmas tree farms can get ag assessment on where they're growing Christmas trees, and vineyards and horse boarding operations. I mean, it's basically anything now that you can think of ag. I think I did one this year actually with hemp. They're growing hemp in a field. I mean, so next slide. So here's your horse boarding. So like horse boarding, there is other, you know, it's not just an acreage thing. You have to have horses, at least 10 horses. I don't know if it's in here on one of these slides, but I know like greenhouse operations, they don't have to have the acreage, but they have to have a certain sales. I believe it's 100,000. I think any ag assessment, if you're over $100,000 gross, you don't have to have 7 acres. But pretty much the only people that are going to do that are going to be greenhouse, you know, big enough greenhouses where they've got enough sales.
Hey, Scott, what about horse breeding?
Horse breeding, I don't believe there's a number. I think if you're a horse breeding operation, it's similar to dairy, because I know, well, and then again, it depends on the assessor, because I know I've done some for people that just have a few horses, you know, not very many, but I don't know if you're going to get a lot of horse breeding operations that are going to have less than 10. But again, the other thing is to remember is if you're trying to get ag assessment, I recommend that people don't come to us first. Go to your assessor first, because they're the ones that determine whether you're going to get it or not. So if you go to them and they say, no, you're not eligible, then you didn't come to us, because we do charge to do the soil group worksheet. So if you ask me to do it and I do it and you don't get it, you're still paying us. So usually we recommend go to the assessor first, make sure they're going to give it to you, and then come to us. There is a deadline. You have to do it by March 1st. So normally for us, between January and March 1st is crazy time, because people forget, put it off. I mean, I can do it any time of the year. Usually this time of year in summer, I don't get right on it, because it's not, you know, I know I have until March 1st and we have a lot of other things we do. During that time of year, we keep the calendar open, and I usually get them done within a couple of days, because I know there's that deadline. So next slide. Oh, so here's your more horse breeding or horse boarding. So again, trails through the woods, support. I did have, this is one I had where some assessors kind of questioned me, and with the trails, and I'm like, well, they told me there was trails. So, and I know usually if we have any major issues, we tell them to call Ag and Markets, and usually, you know, like with the trails through the woods, I think they've actually put it in writing now, because at first it was just kind of like people did it. So like now it's actually in writing, so you can't, it's easier for them to explain it. So next question, or next slide. So here's your APRI. Again, like I said, they've included a lot more now, and I'm not sure if in this, well, there's your less than 7 acres for apiaries and whatnot. I know with Christmas trees and vineyards, apple orchards, anything like you're planting the tree, I don't believe you have to have the 10,000 right off. I think you can still get ag assessment, because obviously like a Christmas tree, you've got to wait maybe 5 or 10 years. So you can still get it while those trees are growing before you can start harvesting them. And I know it's like that with grapes and apples. Anything that there's a time period you have to wait before you start getting production from them. Next slide. So I kind of touched on this. It's the land that you're getting the assessment on. It's not actually the structures. So that's why, like with a house, it's non-ag, because the land is under the house is not, you know, is not being farmed. So next slide. So here's just some more. The 305, again, you get this from the assessor, and we don't help fill them out, because I only do a small portion of what you need. So you'll need our form. We can help you with what information we give you to put on the form, but usually we have them go to the assessors, because this is the assessor's form, and we haven't really had any assessors complain about that. Like they would rather have people come to them and make sure the right information is down. Next slide. And Dustin originally did this. I'm on there now, but you can contact either one of us. And you can contact us if you have other things too. We help with ponds, like I said, with ag drainage. We do have a no-till drill. I think, Nicolette, you've got that flyer. Didn't Dan sent that to you?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, so along with the example of the ag assessment form, there also is a no-till cedar form, and it kind of gives the information on that program that Soil and Water rents out. It's very popular among the horse community so far, but it has a lot of other applications. I myself am actually renting it the last week in April. So if anyone has any questions, you can give me a call. I know Scott's actually used it too. So
Yep.
And that's a really great program. Scott, I do have a question myself in regards to the ag assessment. Now that is something that has to be renewed every year, correct?
Again, I don't think if you're not in an ag district, I believe it does have to be renewed every year. If you're in an ag district, I think there's a 7-year, like you don't have to do it every year.
Okay.
But what it does is, so when you renew it every year, you're actually extending it out 7 years. So everybody has a 7-year commitment. So when you do this, you're agreeing it's going to be an ag for at least 7 years. Now, if you take it out, again, they can charge you whatever you save plus interest. I haven't ever heard of that happening, but I mean, I suppose it can. What else was I going to say? Oh, a lot of times what I'll have people do is, if you're thinking that, like you have children or you have siblings and they might want to build a house or whatever, what I usually tell people is, well, just keep out more than the acre for the residence you're living in. So maybe you put 5 acres in non-ag, and just kind of give me a rough idea of where you want that when I map it. That way there, it's not in ag. So if you do end up building something there, then you don't even have to worry about the issue of if they want to try and charge you for whatever you save during that time.
Okay.
I guess that's
because I've heard mixed things, and I was always curious, and I had a thought that if whether or not you were in an ag district played into that.
Yeah, if you're in an ag district, you don't have to do it every year.
Okay.
But again, it's up to the assessor. And then I know every 10 years, as the law is, they can ask for a new one.
Okay.
So even if nothing's changed, the maps that we use have changed in 10 years. So they can ask for a new one every 10 years. Most of them don't. Some of them do. So again, it kind of gets frustrating because all the assessors, and then if the assessor changes, now you got somebody that comes in and wants to fix everything, and I don't
Play the new sheriff. Now, do we have any other questions for Scott? You can put them in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask him directly. We'll give people a few moments to type it in if they have any. But
they'll think as soon as we're done.
Yeah, that's always how it works. But I want to thank you for joining us though tonight while I have a moment here. And
Yep.
You guys do a lot of really great stuff at Soil and Water. I know I pop in because we were in the same building, or I normally would without our circumstances, and ask a lot of questions. I tell people all the time, I've gone to a few farms and they say, well, I'm afraid to call Soil and Water because if they see some, I don't want them to turn me in, and they're not. So everyone knows, Scott will tell you, they don't turn people in. They will advice.
We're not DEC.
Yeah, they're not DEC. So they're great to, they might tell you what you could or couldn't happen, but they do give a lot of really great, wonderful advice. They're a wonderful resource. And it's funny.
Yeah, if we see you doing something that we don't think you should be doing or that you could get in trouble for, we'll let you know. but we're not, we don't turn people in. So it's just not what we do. So we'll
Now,
yeah, and help you, but
we have a question, which, and I don't think you guys do, but I have information for them. If not, now soil and water, you guys don't test soil, do you? Or do you offer soil testing?
no, we don't do the soil testing.
So
That's you
funny,
guys.
so I was gonna say, so funny you should ask. Actually, Extension does soil testing, and Jessica Holmes can tell you more about that. She'll talk about that in her presentation. But at Extension, we do it. We charge usually $1 per sample, or we could send it out for a more in-depth soil sample, and that's usually around $20 or so. You'd have to check depending on what you want.
We can make soil maps. And we do have some we do have wetland maps. So if you're thinking, do I need to call DEC? We do have maps that are for, basically general use. They're not legal by any means, but they will give you an idea as to whether or not there's wetlands on property and stuff. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, Scott. I appreciate you joining us.
Yep.
And I think you're gonna jump off here.
Yep.
And with us. Okay. All right. Well, if you're gonna jump off, that sounds good. Thank you for joining us. And
No problem.
we're gonna jump to the other end. And again, if anyone has any questions for Scott that come to them afterwards, you can always send me an email and I will forward it to him and get you in contact with them.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott.
Yep. I'll see you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Excuse me here. All right, can you guys see my screen? Yeah.
We can see.
Yep.
All right. So now we're going to talk about farmland evaluation for farm seekers, or people who, we get this question a lot, and it's either someone that has, they bought a farm, so they have farmland and they're like, I want a farm, but I don't know what I want to do. So what can I do with my land? Or they say, I'm looking to buy a farm because I want to do X, Y, and Z. So we're going to talk about different things we should look into and qualities of farmland. But before that, a little introduction of myself. My name is Nicolina. I am the Farm to School Grant Coordinator. I'm also the Ag Program Coordinator and the Ag Economic and Development Coordinator for Saratoga County for Cooperative Extension. Below you will find, this is our office phone number, my email, and our Facebook page. I put a lot of stuff up there. This is a picture of me, and this actually is the same horse. His name is Emmett. I delivered him. He was only a few days old in the top picture, and he actually just turned 4 this past March, and this picture was taken this winter, so he has grown an awful lot. So that's what I do in my free time, and also takes up all my money. So, all right, so where to start? When you're looking at farmland, or you want to start farming, you want to buy farmland, or you're looking at what you have, what do you plan on doing with the land? Like, and being realistic. So what's the size of the land? Either you have 20 acres or you are stuck between, do I want to buy the 25-acre farm or the 200-acre farm? How much land will I need based on what you're looking to do? Now, I'm going to talk about more specifically livestock and those type of qualities that you'll look for in land for that. And Jessica's going to talk about horticulture and growing vegetables and produce and all that fun stuff. I'm going to mute my phone here. All right. So with the land that I have, what can I maintain sustainably? So when you're a farmer and you're working land, the idea is, as long as you can work the land, you can continuously do that. You can constantly bring in money. I guess ideally that's what we'd all like to do, is make money off of it, right? But if you have, if you're looking, you want to have a huge CSA and produce $100,000 worth of produce, or on 2 acres of land, that's not really realistic. It's not going to be sustainable. The same with if you're going to have livestock and you want to have 200 head of cows on 10 acres, it's just, it's not going to work really well, or easily for that matter. So when doing that, the best thing to look at is your long-term and short-term goals. So for example, saying to yourself, okay, in the end, in my end all be all, I want to have, 10 head of cows and you know, I want to have X amount of acres. You know, I want to be able to hay my own hay fields and produce all my own feed. My short-term goal is, before I get the cows, I got to put up fencing. And then I got to figure out what type of fencing I got to put up and how much of it. So just breaking it down into little tiny short-term goals that eventually will lead to that long-term goal. And then it's going to be your management style. You know, there's more than one way to skin a cat. You know, the old saying, there's more than one way to do anything in agriculture. And my dad used to say, you can do it, you know, the easy way or the hard way. Sometimes it's just learning, but, you know, and you're going to go through, and I'll say this a few times, when it comes to farming, every year you will get smarter, because when it's January and it's -20 degrees with a -5 wind chill and you got 4 feet of snow and you're shoveling yourself out, you're going to say to yourself, not next year. I'm not going to make this mistake next year. So again, you'll learn and you're going to change your management style. So the definition of a small farm. Small farms average 231 acres, which is kind of crazy to me, but that's what's defined as a small farm. Very small farms are not 9 acres or less. And it is these small farms that dominate the American farming landscape, as much as 88% of US farms are considered small farms with annual sales of less than 250,000. And that's from the USDA. So I thought that was some fun information when you're, you know, trying to define a small farm. So I'm going to talk about livestock and all the fun animals. And so what would you have on your farm? You know, that's a good thing to think about. You know, are you looking to do cattle? Are you going to do dairy or beef? I mean, and we could talk for hours about, you know, specifically what type of beef you want to do, or the same with dairy. We're just going to kind of go over the generalizations. We're going to have horses. Most of these guys, I put them in here, the beast of burden, the entertainment animal. Some people still use them for work, or they have them for breeding operations, and things of that sort. But we got horses, goats, sheep, swine, and fowl. So livestock in space. So, all right. The biggest thing is, once you decide what you want to do, so maybe you haven't bought the farm yet, or you have, and okay, I want to do beef cows, I want to do dairy cows, pigs. All right, well, like realistically, how much land, property, facilities, fencing, what am I really going to need? What is it going to take? So this is a wonderful resource from the University of New Hampshire. And it was kind of the best representation to kind of break it down by units of animal and enclosed housing, exercising area, and pasture. So example, we got one horse. You know, they talk about different stall size, around 200 square feet for exercising area, and 1 to 2 acres per horse is what they consider to be adequate. Beef cow is 1 to 2 acres, dairy cows 1 to 2 acres. For when you get into the fowl, the hens, you know, hens, broilers, those guys that, you know, depending on your management style, it's going to kind of change. But this kind of gives a really nice overview of how much land you're looking. For one sheep, it's 0.2 to 0.3 acres. And your pigs, you're going to want 12 to 14 on 1 acre, but you use them in rotational. So this is kind of a really good breakdown. This is part of a much larger fact sheet too. If anyone is interested in, I can get that out to everyone. So your management style. I always think this picture is really funny, going wireless. So when you look at your management style, for example, we could talk about pigs. It's a great one. If you want to raise pigs, you really do it one of 2 ways. You can raise them seasonally, or you can be in a full year, having a sow, having piglets, that whole thing. And the way you would manage them is going to be a bit different. You know, if you're getting piglets in the spring and you're butchering in the fall, we always used to do it right around November time is when we butcher. And it's great. You know, you have this cute little piglet. It's cute for a little while. You feed it, and then it gets to fall time when it's getting cold, and then you got delicious bacon all winter long. But you don't have to keep that pig through those cold winter months. Yes, they are big and fat, but they are going to require a much more intensive management style, because you got to have proper housing for them, straw to keep them warm. You know, depending on what type of facilities you have, I know some people that will have heat lamps and stuff for them. It depends. And that especially for your first year, I have a lot of people, their first year, they want to do pigs. My suggestion is just do it seasonally. Get them in the spring, butcher them in the fall, get your feet wet, see what you like. So it's going to be what you decide to do with them. And then you have your crop rotation, if you're going to do crops and you're going to, grow your own feed or not. Your field rotation, a lot of these guys are out to pasture. So what do you want from your pasture or your field? And I see a lot, it's very common with horse people. Do you want an area to let them out and let them run around and get exercise and be wild and free? Or do you want it to feed them? I have 4 horses, I have pasture. I don't feed hay all summer long. So I don't feed hay probably from, depending on the spring, May till September, October, give or take, weather. I just can't afford to feed them hay all year long. So I have to manage my pastures really intensively. So that way I have feed for them. You can do both. You can have a nice big area for them to run, and you can have it so you can grow feed for them. And then when you feed your livestock, are you going to grow your own feed or are you going to buy? If you're going to buy that 100-acre farm, and you have 50 acres of hayfield, that's an option. You can have all the equipment and you can hay it and grow all of your own feed, or you can decide, well, you know what, I'm going to use it for pasture instead, and I'm going to buy my own hay somewhere else. And that's just going to depend on what you want to do in your management style. So why do you use crop rotation? And this is when you're getting into growing your own feed. This is an option. I know long before I came into existence, my dad used to grow oats, and he would do it. He grew it to not only feed his own livestock, but he actually grew enough where he would sell a little bit and make a little money on the side as well. So the biggest part when you get into that is doing crop rotation, and how we talked about doing things sustainably. So when we put things in the ground, and Jess is going to talk about this more, you're using resources and you need to replenish those resources. So you have those, we see them, driving down the road, there's, cornfield after cornfield after cornfield, right? Well, corn is notorious for leaching nitrogen out of the soil. And if you constantly, as the picture shows here, year 1 through 4, you're putting corn on there, it's just going to leach nitrogen. Now, if you were able to rotate that out with soybeans, which is in the legume family, which is rich in nitrogen and replenishes it back into the soil, your soil is going to stay fertile. And then you have down, which is better. You're rotating it with corn, wheat, soybean, and then doing that again. The best is corn, wheat, soybean, and then doing alfalfa for the next 2 years and harvesting that. And here's another thing too, when you're planting this stuff in the ground and you do these rotational crops, you are benefiting the soil. When chosen properly, you can benefit the soil that way. But also, like my dad used to do, he used to collect his oats and he would use it to feed his livestock, and then he'd sell it too, and he'd make a little money off of it. Or, well, I don't know if he made money as much as he covered it, met ends meet, more or less. So when you use cover crops and you start getting into that, and not even just for cover crops, but for pasture as well, as we talked about using the no-till seeder from Soil and Water, that's something I'm actually looking into. I'm going to be doing this spring. I've been planning. So that was one of my, I don't know if it was a short-term or long-term goal, because it took me 2 years to get that in motion. So maybe it was a long-term, but it was getting the fence up. It was picking out my seed. It was figuring out, what time of year I wanted to plant it, what fields I was going to do when. And there were all these little tiny steps that brought me to where I am now. So you can even do this with your pasture. You can plant different grasses. Red clover is a great one. Those are in the legume family. White clover, bird's foot trefoil is a really popular guy in alfalfa. They're nitrogen rich, and it's going to feed my pasture, so I can put my horses on it. They can graze. I can take them off of it, mow it at a proper length, and I just have this constant growth. So I'm constantly able to feed them. So when you have these, they're broken down into 3 different categories, and that's annual, which means the plant has a full life cycle, seed to seed, in 1 year. Biannual is it takes 2 years to complete that life cycle. That was on the alfalfa. That, I think it was the last slide. Let me go back. Was the alfalfa down there at the best rotation. That's for year 3 and year 4. And a perennial is a plant that lives more than 2 years at a time. So when you're starting to look at it, choosing, again, this is a slide we could talk on all night in different circumstances and everything else, but this is something when you really start looking into it. I tell people all the time, I mean, I'm the type of person, I don't have endless funds. If I'm going to spend the money and put all this time and effort into planting and whatever, I want it to work for me. I want the most bang for my buck. So if you're going to take the time to do it, choose something that's working for you, not against you. So then we talked about field rotation. And this is going to come into handy with any of your big pastured livestock. So this is something when, the comment I made before, I'm not buying hay all year long to feed my animals. I just can't afford it. So I had in the beginning, a very similar situation all the way to the left. It was mowed once a year and we had all the horses out on it, and that's just what it was. And there's this theory that if you have 2 cows on a 10-acre pasture all the time, eventually you're just going to run. I mean, it'll be green-ish, but you're going to run out of nutritional, feed stuff. It's just going to be greenish grass, but there's going to be no nutritional value in it. And your pastures, eventually, there's going to be nothing left to it. It's just going to be open space. But if you put 2 cows on 1 acre and switch that acre every day, so now we're in the far right-hand side, this is a very intensive rotational grazing. You will have wonderful grazing pasture for many years to come, because it's getting eaten, it's not getting overgrazed, and then you're moving on, and that area then has time to rest, regrow, and produce those broadleafs and everything else with that nutritional feed stuff in it. So when you have animals and you're looking at whether you want, you're stuck between a 50-acre farm and a 100-acre farm, but you only want like 5 to 10 beef cattle, well, or 10, 20 sheep or goats or whatever it may be. If you decide, all right, I'm going to go for the farm with a little bit less land, but if you manage those fields properly, they could be just as beneficial to you or even more when done well. And I will tell you, it takes time and effort. It's putting up temporary fence, moving them, depending on how intensive your grazing is. It could be you're moving them every day, you're moving them once a week, every 2 weeks. It really depends. And that's going to change week to week, year to year, month to month, season to season. Last spring, they were on that field for 2 weeks. This year, well, they can only be on it for a week because it was so wet and they're really tearing it up. So again, it's one of those things that, depending on how you want to manage it. I know other people that'll have beef cattle and they'll have them, they got 10 acres and they got 5 cows and they had them out and they grazed them for as long as they could. And they really didn't manage their pasture real well. So now they're throwing out round bales all year long. It's not my choice, but it works for them. That's how they decided to manage it. And, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that's their choice. And maybe that's all they can handle as well. I know a lot of us, I still have my full-time job and I'm doing this, so I can't be out there, 12 hours a day as much as I'd like to. So this is kind of a nice example that I like to use when you have your field rotation and what it would look like. And this is a short-term goal, just getting pen to paper and kind of thinking this out. So looking at a piece of property, whether you're going to buy it or you did just buy it, and they'll say, okay, I got cleared land here. What am I going to do? How am I going to lay out these pastures? Where's my house going to go? These work really well. This is a system that was not in place. My parents have owned this farm, over 50 years. And this is something that I've instilled in the past 5 years. And my dad thought I was crazy and he thought it was stupid. And then I started doing it and he kind of sat back, and it took a couple of years and he goes, yeah, you know what? You're right. And it's working really well. But it took a lot of time to set this up. So this is what a rotational pasture would look like. So what to look for in land. I put this up here. This is my little slice of heaven. This is our farm. It's my piece of paradise. Every time I go out to somebody's farm, that's basically what it is. You're going into somebody else's, happy place. So this is mine. It's a big work in progress. It'll forever be. But when you're looking at land, if you have livestock, what are you looking for? open space, okay? Do I have fields? Do I have pasture? Do I have place to put them out, you know, turn out, anything like that? Drainage. I've seen people buy 20 acres and 15 of the 20 acres was, I mean, whether or not we want to argue it was considered wetland, but it was wet. And I've seen people put livestock out on it, and it's just going to make a mud hole, a bigger mud hole. And, you know, when you can dry up some areas with different management practices. I had one spot that was really wet. I cleared out a lot of brush, opened it up, planted some good grass, kept it mowed, and it dried up and it did well, but it was a very, very small area. It was a lot more management for me to do. So you want to look at drainage. Accessibility to water. Is there water on the property? Silly question, right? I mean, but hey, you got to feed them and you got to water them. Is there a well in place? I see a lot of people that will buy a farm. Let's say it's got 20 acres, and then there's another parcel farther down the road, or you know, you can see where our little house is. But then the pasture for the cows or goats or whatever are on the complete other side of the property, and they got to haul water. You can do that, but just think about it. Think about hauling water in the Northeast here in January and February. It's not going to be fun. I actually do not have, we have the horses. We do not have a water spigot out by my water trough. Since I was a little kid, we run hoses in the middle of January. And this is usually the part where people look at us and think we're absolutely bananas. But we run hoses in the middle of January. And the way my dad used to do it, we'd run the hoses and hook them up to the tallest peak of our barn, and we drain them out. And you know what? Didn't matter how cold it got. If we drained those hoses properly, we could hook them up and we could run water, and it worked really well. Now I use the flexible hoses. I have 250 feet of hose, and it folds up into a nice big muck bucket, and I put it in the entryway of the house. My mom really likes it. She's really happy that I do this at her house. I put it in the house and it stays in where it's warm. I take it out. It takes me 5 minutes. I hook up the hose, water the horses, roll it back up, and then I don't have to worry about it freezing. And it's a lot lighter. It's actually a lot easier for me. So accessibility to water and how you're going to do that is a big thing. Road accessibility. I've seen farms that they've got big, beautiful pastures. They've got hay fields. Oh God, they're beautiful. And I've gone out to them and they said, well, we would drive, but it's too muddy. We got to walk. Well, it's great to have all of these hay fields and all of these resources, but if you can't get to it, it's not going to do you a whole lot of good. And then you got to think about, all right, well, do I got to put a road in and those type of things. Soil type, as Scott had mentioned, when they do the ag assessment, they classify them, he said it in 10 different soil types. You know, if you buy farmland and you want to grow something on it, you can't grow something on land that's infertile. And that's really something that Jess is going to get into more specifically, but it's something to think about. You know, infrastructure. So this is a big one that I've seen, and it kind of depends on who you are and what your resources are and your capabilities. But when you look at infrastructure, it's not just buildings. Sometimes it is the well and having that water spigot, that's infrastructure. Fencing is a huge one. My little slice of paradise here is really pretty, but let me tell you, when it comes to fencing, you are limited. If you go down, well, some places you can go down 2 feet, some places you go down a foot, it's coming out. We have solid bedrock. Me and my husband built our house here. It looks like our foundation was poured on a rock parking lot. It's ridiculous. So my fencing type that I can put in here is very limited with my financial means. A friend of mine who lives very close down the road has horses. He went over his fencing budget by $15,000 because he went to go put in these big, beautiful wooden posts and he hit solid bedrock, and then he was paying by the hour, by the foot, and they had to drill through. So that's something to keep in mind. You know, let's say you go to a property and you have 20 acres of pasture and it's all fenced in, but you don't have a building. Well, what type of fencing is it? Is it a high tinsel fencing? That's really expensive. You know, are they big wooden posts? Were they done in well? How old is the fencing? How long is it going to last you? Is it something that can hold in your, the fencing you have for horses and cows is going to be very different from goats and sheep and things of that nature. And you're comparing that to a place that has barns, but they have no fencing in place, then it's going to have to really start weighing out, or it has, it has a small shed and you can make it work for now. And that's that small, short-term goal, and you can work up to getting that big barn. Infrastructure is a really big hurdle, and it can be a really big financial hurdle. Not all animals need a big, beautiful, knotty pine tongue and groove barn with a chandelier on it. I've seen them. I've worked in them. I've been in them. Cows, beef cattle, horses, roof over their heads and a 3-sided structure like a run-in will do them a lot of good. Having a barn is nice to have the option to bring them in, but that'll work. Fowl, you want a place to bring them in at night. And yes, it's a place to keep them in, but more importantly, it's secure enough to keep the unwanted critters out, fox in the hen house. Sheep and goats, having cover is sufficient. If you can bring them in, that is a good option, but maybe it's putting up a run-in shed this year, having it for the next couple of years, and then moving up to that barn. So infrastructure is a big thing to look for in land, especially when it comes to livestock. Oh, so now I'm going to move on to Jessica Holmes. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Did I go too fast? No? All right, then Jess, are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. Hold on, I'm going to mute myself and then I'll change this. Without further ado, Jessica Holmes.
Can you just forward it one? Thanks. So my name is Jessica Holmes, and I'm the Master Gardener Coordinator for Warren County and Horticulture Educator for Saratoga County. So I bounce back and forth between each county. Saratoga County obviously has a lot more agriculture, so this pertains a lot more to Saratoga County. And I went to school at SUNY Cobleskill for ag business, and I got my agriculture education degree at Murray State University. So we'll talk about horticulture topics. It's kind of a broad topic. So anything in relation to gardening, crop farming, landscaping, vegetable and fruit farming, weed identification, plant breeding. So there's a lot that goes into horticulture, but it's basically defined as the art or practice of garden cultivation and management. So there is like small scale, which I would consider a homeowner level, or maybe like if someone had a small roadside stand. And then your mid to large scale would be something that maybe does produce a profit, but it's still kind of a hobby farm. And then when you get into your commercial farms, this is something that is more of a business than a hobby, and there might be employers involved. Your profit is going to be sufficient enough to live on. It's a large scale operation, so you're planting a lot of crops, or you have, a certain amount of profit level. So the first thing that we'll talk about is growing vegetables. So there's quite a few different things that go into the soil. So the first thing you want to think of when you're purchasing land is the pH. So your pH for vegetables should be around 5.8 to 6.2 for optimal levels, but most plants can live in a 6.5. So that's pretty much a basic pH that, most things can thrive on, is that 6.5. But it's always a good idea to check out the soil, check out the pH, and know that depending on how far off your pH is, it can take a couple of years to fix that. So, you might not have optimal growing conditions for 2 to 3 years once you move to that piece of property. And then your soil type is another important thing to keep in mind. So each crop needs a different type of soil, and your vegetable crops are going to want a well-draining soil where there's no standing water. So you want something like a loamy soil that is it's going to be able to drain. It's not going to hold on to a ton of water. So something like that, a loamy soil. And if you have to amend it, you can do that with like topsoil or compost. But it's always a good idea to just check out what you have first and just know that you might need to change it or add to it. And then, keep in mind your drainage. You don't want sitting water for growing vegetables. And then your organic matter is another important thing. So typically we want 2% organic matter or higher. So if you're adding compost every year, that's definitely going to increase it and help. And you can check the organic matter when you check the nutrient levels. So to do this, we would send it to Agri-One, which is a lab out in Ithaca, and they would test your nutrients, which would be your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. They would check the pH levels for you. They would check your organic matter percentage, and then they would give you recommendations based on what they see. And then here on the right side, these are just a few crops that you might be growing. It gives you pHs of a couple of them. So if anybody wants this, I can definitely send it your way. But like cucumbers, 6.5, celery 6.5. So pretty much everything wants a 6.5 range. But if you're just, if you're growing in one bed and that bed is between 5.8 and 6.2, that's the ideal range for vegetables. So just keep that in mind. And then you also want to think about your environment. So, when you're purchasing property or if you're going to start growing vegetables, what's your sun condition like? You need to have between 6 to 8 hours or more of full sunlight to grow vegetables properly. Is there any buildings? Is there any trees in the way? Is the land already cleared? Are you going to have to clear it? So those are some things that you really should keep in mind. And then water needs. So vegetables need a ton of water. They're always going to need water. They're not just going to, adjust to rain. It doesn't work like that. So you need to make sure you have a source of water because it is the most important part of growing vegetables. So if you're just doing a small scale vegetable farm, you might be able to get away with just using a hose that's run from your house or a building. If you're large scale or commercial, you might want to get an extra well. Or, if you know that your well is sufficient enough to do your farm and your home, or maybe it's completely separate from your home, then, whatever works for you, but you might want to consider getting a second well. You can definitely hand water if you want with a hose, or, you could always invest in sprinklers or soaker hoses on the ground. Crop rotation is another important part of vegetable gardening. So you should rotate crop families at least every 2 to 3 years. So this will help to avoid disease, insect, and nutrient problems. So you can see on the right side here, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not. But so your Solanaceous family is going to be your tomatoes, potatoes, peppers. So say you have this family in, section 1, then 2 or 3 years later, you can move to this family here and plant onions or something. Just so, you're not getting an overlap of things like insects in the soil or diseases in the soil that will attack the same type of plants in that family. And I can also send this to you if anybody wants it. And then you also should be thinking, are you going to direct sow? Are you going to just put the seeds directly into the soil? Are you going to be getting a greenhouse or starting your seeds in a greenhouse? Or will you buy transplants? So just keeping that in mind. And then your wildlife. So you could use deterrents, raised beds, or even like a baited electric fence. And then growing fruit. So you want to think about the same type of things when you're growing fruit. So your different soil qualities. So your pH, this will range from about 5.5 to 6.5, depending on what you're growing. Blueberries will like a pH of about 5 to 5.5, where your apple trees will like that 6 to 6.5. And then, you know, again, you don't want to have sitting water. So that's pretty much for anything, unless, you know, it's like a shrub or something, or a tree like a weeping willow that likes that sitting water. And then your organic matter should be above 2% again. And then your trees, so your apple trees, pear trees, cherry trees, anything like that is going to want 6 or more hours of sunlight. And then your blueberries can get away with a little bit less sunlight. I definitely wouldn't go under 5 hours, but if it's like a weaker, like morning sunlight, you can get away with that. Whereas, you know, your fruit trees are going to want more of that full sun. You can move it. And then, so your water needs in an orchard is going to be high at first. So they're going to be high until your plants establish. So it takes about 2 to 3 years for them to really start utilizing the water that's in the ground. So, you know, the first year you plant them, they're going to need to be watched every couple of days. I would say every 2 days. You want to go out there and make sure that they're, you know, watered. Just stick your hand in the soil 6 to 8 inches. Make sure the soil's wet enough. And then after that 2-year mark, you could probably push it to, I would say every 3 to 5 days, you could check them. And then, you know, on your 3rd year, you could push it to like, you know, every week or every other week and just, you know, see how they're doing. And then eventually, just like a shrub or a tree that you plant in your yard, you won't have to water it unless it's a time of like really bad drought. And then the time to yield. So it depends on how old your transplants are, but it does take a little bit longer for a regular size fruit tree to grow and produce fruit. So it's about 4 to 6 years for a regular size tree, and it's about 3 to 4 years for a semi-dwarf tree to produce fruit. And then your blueberry bush will produce fruit in about 3 to 4 years, and it will reach full production at 6 years. So what if you purchase land with an existing orchard? You want to keep a few things in mind. How do the trees look? Do they need to be pruned? Are the trees healthy? Can you tell if there's any insect damage? How old are they? And how is the soil? So you do want to make sure that, you know, there's no disease issues, no insect issues, because this can live in the soil for a certain amount of time, depending on what it is. So if you're planning on renovating an orchard and maybe pulling those trees out and starting over, make sure you get all of that stump out. Or if you're leaving them, you know, just make sure that these trees are able to be saved if there is an issue with them. Just really have someone come out if you're unsure and take a look at these trees and make sure that you'll be able to use them and that you're not going to be dumping tons of money into them to try and save them. And then what type of variety? That's another important one, because a lot of the old orchards have really tall trees, which are hard to reach, where now we're kind of leaning towards those semi-dwarf to dwarf trees, which are a lot shorter. And a lot of new orchards were able to plant a lot closer together. So just keep that in mind for the use of land. And then, you know, obviously getting your nutrient analysis done, you know, to see what type of things we need to improve on in the soil. And is there any equipment that you might get handed to when you purchase the property? And then we have Christmas tree growing. So your soil qualities, you know, again, the same type of thing. Your pH should be about 6 to 6.5 with Christmas trees, and your soil type, This can be a little bit more lenient than it would be with like your apples or your vegetables. You are going to want a soil that's loamy for the best growth conditions. And it does take, about 6 to 12 years, depending on the variety, to produce a marketable Christmas tree. So keep that in mind too. And again, it just, it depends on the variety, how long it does take to grow to maturity and how big they are when you do purchase them and put them in the ground. And then for spacing, you want to do them about 5 to 8 feet away. And, you should probably leave a roadway. This will give you access. And if it is like a cut down operation, like everyone comes in and cuts their own tree, then, it's just easier for them to drive up there or, to bring the tree back, or for your employees to go up and grab the trees down if they're cutting them themselves. And then scouting, this is really important as well. You always want to scout for insect and diseases, especially on a Christmas tree farm. If, an insect or disease gets to one tree, it's going to get to all of them eventually. So keep your eye on them because it will spread fast. And maple production, so there's probably not a ton of people looking to get into maple production unless they already have trees in their property, or unless they're purchasing property with the trees, because it does take an extremely long time for them to grow. Time to yield, to be able to produce syrup would be 20 to 40 years. The trees need to be about 10 to 12 inches in diameter to even tap. And then, if you want to get 2 taps one tree, you're looking at 20 inches in diameter for the tree trunk. So keep that in mind. You really want to have trees in that property. You don't want to go in and plant because you might never see this farm produce. Your kids might. But if you can purchase property that already has the trees on it, then do that. And you can use sugar maple trees. Obviously, they do produce the most amount of sugar in the sap, and so the highest concentration. And then your red maples, silver maples, black maples, and you could use, like, if you wanted to make birch syrup, you could do birch trees, but I don't really know much about that, so I'll stick to the maple production. So the nice thing about maple trees is that they can live in a variety of soil types. They're not, hard to grow. They're more tolerant of different soil types. Their ideal pH is a 6.5, but they can live in soils that are from 5.5 to 7 for a pH. And again, they're more tolerant, so they can be grown in sand to clay soils. I don't know if I have another slide or not. Did you guys have any questions?
I have a question for both Jessica and Nicolina. You've mentioned a ton of great things to consider when you're looking at land or thinking about the right kind of farm operation on a piece of land that you already have. What resources are available to help? Because while you've listed these considerations, I wouldn't know personally how to approach that, and I'm guessing some of our audience might not.
Do you want to start, Jess, or you want me to go?
I'll let you answer that one.
Okay. So when it comes to, kind of where to start, extension is a really wonderful resource. You can always give us a call, and it happens a lot. I've had a lot of people call in these very similar situations. I had one guy that wanted to buy a 70-acre farm up in Corinth, and he wanted to grow produce. And so I, gave him the address and I looked it up. I said, well, the majority of the farm is on a mountainside. I don't know how easy that's going to be to grow produce on a mountainside. So there was a lot of talking there. you know, when kind of giving ideas and direction from there, you know, people, I know I point a lot of people when they get into those finance questions, pointing them to Farm Credit East, farmland conservation. I point them towards you, Mike, with Saratoga Plan. There is FarmNet too as a resource for finding out information. I'm trying to think, is there any other ones, Jess, that I'm not thinking of?
I think you covered most of them, yeah.
Okay. If that's the case, thank you, Jess, for joining us and talking about horticulture. I know sometimes it's hard to put it all into a short presentation. We could talk for a very long time on very specific topics, but thank you.
Thanks for
And
having
thank you both. I think that was fantastic, and it's super helpful to get that view. Obviously, there's a lot to dig into on any given topic. And so I think it's a bit of an advertisement for folks on the meeting, or anyone who watches this later. Go ahead and reach out to Cooperative Extension and dig in deeper.